You won't believe what happened on my flight that day. One entitled woman thought she could just take my first-class seat because she deserved it more. She had no idea the reality check that was coming. Asterisk, I had been looking forward to this day for weeks, no months. After a year of stressful business trips, endless airport layovers, and cramped middle seats between strangers who couldn't keep their elbows to themselves, I finally decided I deserved something better. So, for my upcoming flight from New York to Los Angeles, I splurged. I paid for a first-class ticket. It wasn't cheap, in fact. It was probably the most expensive travel purchase I'd ever made in my life, but I convinced myself it was worth it. This wasn't just about a comfortable seat. It was about reclaiming my sanity. The morning of the flight, I woke up early, too excited to sleep in. My suitcase was already packed from the night before, zipped neatly with every item folded just the way I liked. I put on my most comfortable travel outfit, black joggers, a soft hoodie, and sneakers. Nothing fancy, but perfect for a long flight. On the way to the airport, I could already picture myself sitting in that wide leather seat, sipping a complimentary drink before takeoff, stretching my legs as much as I wanted. I could almost feel the weight of stress lifting off my shoulders. By the time I reached JFK Airport, the place was its usual chaotic self. Rolling suitcases clattered across the floor, boarding announcements echoed overhead, and travelers darted round with a mix of panic and fatigue. But for once I wasn't stressed. I checked in at the dedicated first-class counter, which, by itself, felt like a luxury, and breezed through security faster than I ever thought possible. The boarding gate wasn't crowded yet when I arrived. I found an empty seat and pulled out my phone, scrolling through emails and news. When the announcement came over the speakers that first-class passengers may now board, I felt a small thrill of pride. This was my turn to walk down the jet bridge without rushing or feeling like I was in anyone's way. The plane's interior smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new upholstery. My seat, 2A, was right by the window. It looked even better than in the pictures, wide, cushioned, with a personal screen and a small compartment for my bag. I stowed my carry-on above me and sank into the leather. The seat hugged me like it knew I'd been waiting for this moment. A flight attendant offered me a drink before the rest of the passengers even boarded, and I gladly accepted a sparkling water with a slice of lime. I was halfway through enjoying it when the calm atmosphere cracked. A shadow fell over me, blocking the light from the aisle. I looked up to see a woman staring down at me with an expression that suggested I had just stolen her car. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp, angular features, perfectly manicured nails, and enough gold jewelry to catch every bit of cabin light. She clutched a boarding pass in one hand like it was evidence in a trial. "You're in my seat," she said sharply. No greeting, no smile, just accusation. I blinked. "I'm sorry." She thrust the ticket toward me as if the mere sight of it would make me vanish. "This is my seat, first class, right here." Her voice was loud enough that a few people in the row ahead turned to glance over their shoulders. I took a breath and kept my tone calm. "Your ticket says 1C," I said after glancing at it. "That's in economy." Toward the back. Her lips curled into a smirk, but it wasn't a friendly one. "I always fly first class," she said, as if that statement alone overrode the facts. They must have made a mistake. "But you can just move. You're young. You don't need first class." For a second, I wondered if I'd heard her right. Move to economy after I'd paid hundreds more for this seat. My instinct was to laugh, but something about the way she stood there like she was entirely serious kept me composed. "I'm sorry, but I paid for this seat," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The flight attendants can help you find yours." She didn't like that answer. Her smirk dropped, replaced by a deep frown. "I'm telling you, there's been a mix-up," she said, louder now. "I am not sitting in coach. It's beneath me." The woman's words hung in the air for a moment, dripping with condescension. Passengers were now openly watching. I could feel their eyes bouncing between us like they were following a tennis match. My sparkling water suddenly tasted sharper. Flight attendant approached, probably having noticed the growing tension. She was petite, with a calm but authoritative expression. "Is there a problem here?" she asked politely. "Yes," the woman said immediately, pointing at me as if I were a criminal. "This person is in my seat. I booked first class." The attendant looked at her ticket, then at me, then back at the ticket. Her smile never wavered, but her tone was firm. "Ma'am, your ticket is for seat 1C. That's an economy. This seat belongs to this passenger." The woman's jaw dropped. "That can't be right. I told you, I always fly first class. I'm a loyal customer. I understand, but the seating is based on what you purchased," the attendant said. Her patience measured. The woman turned back to me, eyes narrowed. "You could be a gentleman and move," she said, as though my age and gender somehow obligated me to surrender my seat. I met her gaze evenly. "And you could take the seat you actually paid for," I said. Her cheeks flushed, whether from embarrassment or rage, I couldn't tell. She muttered something under her breath about entitled kids before snatching her ticket back and stomping down the aisle toward the back of the plane. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The flight attendant gave me a reassuring smile before moving on to help another passenger. I thought that was the end of it. Little did I know, This woman wasn't done with me yet. The next 10 minutes passed quietly. Boarding continued. The hum of conversation filled the cabin, and the overhead bins clicked shut one by one. I started to relax again, pulling out a book from my bag. But then, I saw her again. She was making her way back up the aisle. A forced smile plastered across her face. She stopped beside my seat, leaning down slightly so her voice was low but still tinged with that sharp edge. "I have a medical condition," she said, as if revealing a great secret. "I can't sit in cramped spaces. I need this seat." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, but before I could finish, she turned to the attendant who was nearby and repeated her claim, this time louder. "I can't sit in economy. I have a medical condition that requires extra space." The attendant's brow furrowed. "Do you have documentation for that, ma'am?" The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "I shouldn't need to prove anything. It's a matter of comfort and health." "I understand," the attendant said gently but firmly. "But without documentation, I can't reassign another passenger's seat. We can offer you an upgrade if any seats are available after boarding, but at this time, this seat is taken." The woman's fake smile cracked. Her voice rose. "This is outrageous. I will not be treated like this." By now, several passengers were watching openly. Some shook their heads, others just stared. I kept my gaze on my book, though my heart was beating faster. I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat. And then, things escalated even more. The captain himself emerged from the cockpit, his tall frame casting a long shadow down the aisle. His presence had an immediate effect. The noise level dropped, conversations hushed. He stopped beside us, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Is there a problem here?" The attendant quickly explained the situation. The captain listened, then turned to the woman. "Ma'am, you have two choices. Take the seat listed on your ticket, or we will have to ask you to leave the aircraft." Her mouth opened and closed like she was about to argue, but the captain's steady gaze left no room for negotiation. For a moment, she seemed to weigh her options. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward economy. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The rest of the passengers returned to their own conversations, the hum of normalcy returning. The attendant leaned down to me. "Sorry about that," she said softly. "Some people just don't like hearing no." I nodded a small smile, tugging at my lips. No harm done. But in the back of my mind, I knew the story wasn't over. People like her didn't just give up that easily. I tried to focus on my book as the rest of the passengers boarded, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. The first class or nothing. Woman in seat 1 to see. I could still feel the echo of her glares every time she passed me, and a small part of me stayed on edge, wondering if she'd try another stunt. Once the cabin doors closed and the crew began their pre-flight announcements, I finally began to relax. The quiet hum of the engines was oddly comforting. The man in the seat across the aisle was already dozing off, a travel pillow wrapped around his neck, while a young couple behind me whispered excitedly about their honeymoon. Everything about the moment told me the drama was over. But people like her don't just melt into the background. About 20 minutes into the flight, after we'd reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt signs switched off, I noticed movement from the corner of my. She was making her way toward the front again. This time, her walk was slower, almost deliberate, like she was plotting something. The aisle was narrow, but she didn't just pass through. She stopped right beside my seat, leaning slightly toward me. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I closed my book and looked at her evenly. "Yes, actually, thank you." She gave a cold smile. "You know, it's funny. I spend thousands every year with this airline. I've been a loyal customer for over a decade. And yet here I am, shoved into the back, while someone like you gets to sit up here. Doesn't seem fair, does it?" I could tell this wasn't about fairness, this was about control. People like her didn't care about rules or logic. They cared about winning, even if the game only existed in their head. "I'm sitting in the seat I paid for," I said plainly. "That's how it works." Her eyes narrowed. "It's how it works for some people." Before I could reply, one of the attendants approached with a tray of drinks for first class. The woman stepped aside just enough for the attendant to pass, but didn't move away completely. She was lingering, clearly waiting for me to slip up or engage further. "Ma'am," the attendant said kindly but firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat. We'll be serving snacks shortly." The woman sighed dramatically as if the requests were a massive inconvenience. "Fine, but you might want to talk to your manager about the seating policies. This is no way to treat loyal customers." She finally retreated down the aisle, and I could hear her voice fading into complaints as she reached her row. The attendant glanced at me with a knowing look. "Don't let her bother you," she said quietly. "We see this more often than you'd think." I nodded, but my mind was already replaying the conversation. I could tell this wasn't over. About half an hour later, my suspicion was confirmed. We'd just been served warm towels and small bowls of mixed nuts when the cabin intercom crackled. "If there is a passenger on board with medical experience, please make yourself known to a member of the crew." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. My heart sank slightly. Was someone really sick, or was this somehow connected To her, it seemed ridiculous to think she'd fake a medical emergency just to get moved, but after what I'd seen so far, I wasn't ready to rule it out. A few moments later, the same woman appeared again at the front of the plane, this time escorted by an attendant. She was holding her side and making a show of wincing with every step. She says she's feeling unwell. The attendant explained quietly to another crew member. She's asking to be moved up here so she can recover. The captain was informed. A tense few minutes passed as the crew asked her questions about her symptoms. Eventually, they brought her a bottle of water and told her to return to her seat while they monitored the situation. No upgrade, no first-class seat. She walked back to row 12 with the slow, exaggerated steps of someone trying to look pitiful. But the second she sat down, I could hear her voice again, not weak or sick, but sharp and irritated as she complained to the man beside her. After that, I didn't see her for a while. I finished my book, watched a movie, and even managed to doze off for about half an hour. When I woke, the attendants were serving lunch, a perfectly arranged plate of chicken, vegetables, and a small bread roll. I was halfway through it when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was her. "Again, I just want you to know," she said in a hushed tone, "that seat you're sitting in should have been mine. I've spoken to corporate before about mistakes like this, people who take what doesn't belong to them." She trailed off with a meaningful look. I didn't respond. I just took another bite of my food. Her eyes narrowed again. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "Ma'am," the attendant's voice came from behind her. "Please return to your seat. This is the third time we've had to ask you to stay in your assigned area. If it happens again, the captain will have to get involved." For a split second, I thought she might explode right there. But instead, she turned on her heel and stalked back to her row without another word. I thought that was the last I'd hear from her for the rest of the flight, and technically was until we landed. When the plane touched down in Los Angeles and we began to disembark, I stayed in my seat, letting the aisle clear. As I gathered my things, I noticed her standing just beyond the gate area, arms crossed, glaring in my direction. She said nothing, but the look she gave me was enough to make one thing clear in her mind. This battle wasn't over. The funny thing was, she'd spent the entire flight trying to prove she was above everyone else, but all she'd managed to do was prove the opposite. And she didn't even realize it. The air inside the terminal was thick with the scent of coffee and that faint, metallic Thames of airport ventilation systems. I was rolling my carry-on toward the baggage claim when I saw her again. She was standing just beyond the arrival gate, her posture stiff, eyes scanning the crowd. At first I thought she was simply waiting for someone, but the way her gaze locked onto me left no doubt she'd been standing there on purpose. I told myself to just keep walking, but as I approached, she stepped directly into my path. "You know," she began, her voice low, but charged with tension. "Some people have the decency to make things right after a mistake." I sighed inwardly. I didn't make a mistake. I sat in the seat I bought. She tilted her head slightly, as if pitying my ignorance. "Maybe you think that, but I've been flying for years. I've earned the right to sit up there. People like you just get lucky." The word lucky hit me like a tiny slap. I wanted to tell her how many hours I'd worked, how many trips I'd endured in cramped seats, how I'd saved specifically for this one ticket, but I knew any explanation would be wasted on her. "I'm not interested in continuing this conversation," I said, stepping to the side, but she moved with me, blocking my way again. "You think this is over? I'm going to file a complaint. I know the right people in the airline, you'll see." At that moment, one of the flight attendants from our plane happened to pass through the terminal. She was wheeling her own small suitcase, clearly off duty, but when she spotted us, she slowed down. "Is everything all right here?" the attendant asked. The woman didn't miss a beat. "No, this passenger stole my seat, and your airline did nothing about it." I was humiliated. The attendant's expression didn't change, but her tone sharpened. "Ma'am, we've already explained this to you multiple times during the flight. That passenger's seat was correctly assigned. If you continue to harass other customers, we may have to involve airport security." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross the woman's face. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. With a huff, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the tile. I thought that was the end of it, but sometimes, the universe likes to give you closure in ways you don't expect. Down at the baggage claim, I found a spot near the carousel and waited for my suitcase. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard a sharp voice from across the area. I didn't have to look to know who it belonged to. She was arguing with an airline representative loudly enough for half the people in baggage claim to hear. Something about her luggage being mishandled and unacceptable service for someone of her status. The rep, a young man in his 20s, was trying his best to remain calm, but she was relentless. "I expect compensation," she declared, "and a voucher for first-class travel next time at least." The rep replied politely, "Ma'am, your bag will be on the next carousel rotation. There's been no mishandling and I can't issue compensation without cause." The woman threw her hands up dramatically. This is exactly the problem with customer service these days. No respect for people who keep this airline in business. By now, people were openly watching the scene. A few were even recording on their phones. I noticed the attendant from earlier standing nearby, speaking quietly into a walkie-talkie. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers approached. "Ma'am," one of them said firmly, "we've had multiple reports of you harassing staff and passengers. We need you to lower your voice and step aside." Her indignation spiked instantly. "I am the victim here. That man," she pointed toward me, "took my seat, and now my bag is late. This is harassment." The officer's voice remained calm. "Your bag is here now. Please take it and leave the baggage area. If you continue causing a disturbance, we will have to escort you from the premises." There was a beat of silence, where you could almost hear her pride cracking. She grabbed her suitcase off the belt with more force than necessary, muttering something under her breath, and began wheeling it toward the exit. But as she passed me, she stopped just long enough to shoot me one last glare, the kind meant to burn a hole through someone. It didn't work. In fact, I almost laughed, not because I enjoy seeing people embarrassed, but because the whole scene was such a perfect, poetic end to her performance. She'd spent the entire day trying to prove she was more important than everyone else, and in the end, she'd only managed to prove that she was her own worst enemy. As I walked out into the California sunshine, my suitcase trailing behind me, I felt lighter than I had all day. Not just because the flight was over, but because I knew something she didn't. The more you try to climb over others to feel superior, the harder you fall when reality catches up. The next morning, I was sitting in the hotel lobby, sipping on a cup of coffee and waiting for my ride to a meeting, when the last person I expected to see walked through the revolving doors. Her. At first I thought I must be imagining it. Los Angeles is huge. The odds of bumping into her again seemed microscopic. But there she was, dragging the same oversized suitcase, wearing an expression that radiated discontent. She was on the phone, speaking loudly enough that the lobby's soft jazz music could barely compete. "No, absolutely not," she was saying into the receiver. "I am not paying for this room. The view is unacceptable. I specifically requested oceanfront, and they've given me a wall." The desk clerk behind the counter gave a strained smile as she approached, ending her call with a sharp "I'll deal with this." She plunked her bag down, immediately launching into a complaint about how she was a valued rewards member, and how this establishment was beneath her standards. I told myself not to get involved. I had no stake in this, but the universe clearly wasn't done weaving our paths together. A moment later, a man in a tailored suit walked into the lobby. He had that confident, alert demeanor of someone used to solving problems in public. The clerk's eyes lit up in relief as she waved him over. "Mr. Alvarez, can you assist with this?" The suited man, the hotel manager, apparently introduced himself to her with a polite handshake. "I understand you're unhappy with your room." "Unhappy," she scoffed. "That's an understatement. This hotel is a disgrace. I was promised first-class treatment, and so far I've had nothing but disappointment, starting with your staff." She shot a glance toward the clerk, who shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Alvarez remained calm. "I apologize for any misunderstanding. May I see your reservation details?" She handed him her phone, but I could see from across the room that she was already bracing herself for an argument. After scanning her booking, Mr. Alvarez's polite expression didn't waver, but his tone gained a layer of steel. "Ma'am, your reservation clearly states City View. There is no mention of an oceanfront room. The rate you booked is for exactly the room you were given." Her mouth twitched. "That's irrelevant. I always get oceanfront. It's an unspoken rule for someone of my status." "Unfortunately," Mr. Alvarez said, "we cannot upgrade without either a booking change or availability. At the moment, we are fully booked for oceanfront rooms." Her voice rose. "So you expect me to look out at a brick wall for the next 3 nights? This is outrageous. Do you know who I am?" That was the moment everything shifted. The hotel lobby was not empty. Guests waiting to check in or out had started to gather subtle glances in her direction. A couple sitting near the window actually paused mid-bite at their breakfast to watch. The quiet murmur of the crowd was like a growing tide. Mr. Alvarez, to his credit, didn't take the bait. "Ma'am, I do not know who you are," he said, evenly, "but I do know that our hotel treats all guests with the same respect and fairness. If you'd like to escalate this matter, we can involve our corporate office." She laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Escalate? Oh, I'll escalate, and when I'm done, you'll regret treating me this way." Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the air, and I saw one of the other staff discreetly pick up a phone. The situation was tipping toward becoming a full spectacle, and then the universe delivered the final blow. From behind me, I heard a man's voice, firm, authoritative, and instantly familiar. "Excuse me, ma'am, we need to have a word." I turned, and there he was, the captain from our flight yesterday. Same uniform, same calm authority. He must have been staying at the same hotel, because he stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd already seen her in action. Her eyes widened. "You," she spat. "You're the one who threatened to throw me off the plane." He didn't flinch, correct? "And I see you're continuing your behavior here. I'm advising the hotel staff to document this incident. In my line of work, repeat disruptive behavior can be taken seriously, especially when it affects businesses and fellow customers." Her indignation faltered for just a second, but she quickly tried to recover. "This is harassment." "I have every right to know," Mr. Alvarez interrupted. "You have the right to be treated fairly, as we have done. You do not have the right to verbally abuse staff or make demands that contradict your reservation." By now, every eye in the lobby was on her. Phones were subtly held up at angles that screamed recording. Even the background jazz seemed to fade, replaced by the hum of whispers and the quiet clicking of camera shutters. The captain stepped closer, his voice low enough for her but audible to those nearby. "Ma'am, you're not entitled to special treatment because you say so. That's not how airlines work. That's not how hotels work. That's not how life works." Something in his tone made the words land heavier than any argument she'd faced so far. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for someone to back her up, but all she found were strangers watching her fall apart. Her face flushed crimson. "Fine," she hissed. She grabbed her suitcase handle, spun on her heel, and stormed toward the revolving doors. The glass spun slowly as she pushed her way out, and for a moment, the whole lobby was silent. Then someone in the corner let out a small, knowing chuckle, and the tension dissolved into murmured conversation. Mr. Alvarez turned to the staff. "Let's make sure she's marked in our system. If she tries to book here again, we'll know." The captain caught my eye across the room and gave me the smallest of nods, a silent confirmation that the chapter, finally, was closed. As I walked out into the bright morning, I realized something important. Entitlement feeds on attention, but reality doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just waits patiently for its moment, and when it arrives, it's impossible to ignore. The rest of my trip went by in peaceful contrast to how it had started. With the hotel lobby drama behind me, I finally got to focus on the reason I'd come to Los Angeles in the first place. I attended my meetings, explored a few coastal spots in the evenings, and even treated myself to a quiet dinner at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city lights. The warm California air felt like it was carrying away the last traces of tension from the trip's rocky beginning. But even as I enjoyed the calm, I found myself thinking about her from time to time, not with anger that had already burned itself out, but with a kind of puzzled curiosity. What made someone feel the need to live like that, constantly trying to prove their importance to strangers? It was exhausting just to watch. Living it must have been worse. The more I thought about it, the more I realized her behavior wasn't about a seat on a plane or a room in a hotel. Those were just excuses. She needed control. She needed to feel superior. And when she couldn't get that, she lashed out, convinced that the world was treating her unfairly. I'd seen entitlement before, but never so concentrated in one person. And the truth was, part of me felt a little sorry for her. Not for the embarrassment she faced, she brought that on herself, but for the fact that her entire sense of worth seemed to be tied to how she could outdo someone else. It's a tiring way to live, always measuring yourself against others and always feeling like you come up short unless you're on top. On my final day in LA, I sat at a small cafe near the beach, sipping a latte while watching the waves roll in. Families were building sandcastles, surfers were paddling out into the water, and couples were walking along the shoreline, hand in hand. Nobody here seemed worried about proving they were more important than anyone else. They were just living. In the moment, it struck me that the real luxury on that trip hadn't been the first-class seat or the city view hotel room. It was the ability to be content exactly where I was. No arguing, no competing, no desperate need to be seen as better. Just being there, in that moment, was enough. When it came time to head back to the airport for my flight home, I caught myself half wondering if I'd see her again. I didn't. In fact, the return flight was blissfully uneventful. No confrontations, no shouting matches, no drama. Just a smooth journey across the country. A reminder that most people travel without turning the trip into a battleground. As I sat in my seat, watching the clouds drift past, I thought about how quickly moments can turn into stories. A 2-hour flight had become a saga, one I'd never planned to be a part of. But the truth is, it left me with more than just a wild tale to tell. It left me with a reminder: when someone tries to drag you into their chaos, you don't have to go with them. You can stay in your seat, literally or figuratively. You can let their storm blow past without letting it ruin your view. And sometimes, the best way to win is simply not to play the game they're trying to force on you. By the time we landed back home, I knew I'd probably never see her again. But I also knew I'd remember her, not as some villain who ruined my trip, but as the perfect example of how entitlement eventually collapses under its own weight. The reality check had come, not because I fought her, but because the truth has a way of showing itself whether people like it or not. As I stepped off the plane and walked into the familiar terminal of my home airport, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. What gratitude that I'd stood my ground without losing my cool. Gratitude for the calm people who stepped in when they needed to. Gratitude for the reminder that life is a lot lighter when you let go of the need to win every argument. Sometimes the best stories come from the worst situations. And this one will stick with me, not because of her, but because of what it taught me about myself. I don't need to outshine anyone. I don't need to prove I belong. I just need to keep moving forward, seat by seat, step by step, moment by moment. Life will always have its Karens, people who think the rules don't apply to them, who believe they're owed something extra just for existing. But the real trick isn't beating them. The real trick is living in such a way that their noise doesn't drown out your peace. And that's a lesson worth carrying far beyond any flight or hotel lobby. So now, when I think back on that trip, I don't picture her glares or her dramatic speeches. I picture the quiet moments in between, the clink of ice in a glass of sparkling water, the sound of waves hitting the shore, the hum of a plane's engines as it carries you home. Those are the things that matter. The rest is just turbulence. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life tales like it, make sure to like, share, and comment on the video. Subscribe to my YouTube channel Hoexed for more stories that will keep you hooked from start to finish.